Hey guys, welcome back to another video of Frosty Explain. This is actually the last episode until the next chapter has been written. So it's been on a slight break, so don't worry about it. I'm sure he will upload it as soon as possible. I'm messaging him, and without any more delay, we should begin this video. But I'm going to give you a small summary of what happened until now. So as has begun his journey, he got the gym badge of to gym future and cerulean. He got some pies. He got to the Damien's Charmander. He got the Charmander, and now he's going to bit more interesting place. So I'm not going to give you this and um, spoil the fun, but I'm going to give you a small hint. That's aura. So just think about it and watch this episode. So let's begin.
Meowsy was purring under the gentle petting of the odd-feeling human that seems to have her Pokeball. She curved her body up as his hand went down he back and over her tail. In the last few minutes, she had decided that this human was so much better than Damien. When she was given to Damien by her first master, she wasn't sure what to think of him at first, but after being brought out of her Pokeball a few times and was ordered to a payday. The problem was that she didn't know how to use the move, and Damien kept ordering her to use it before he resorted to kicking her as if that would get her to learn the move. The only reason that Damien kept her around was that he figured that he would be able to get her to use the move and he would be able to get more money out of her. If Meowsy could use the move, she would have used it to help her first master since she was given away because her master couldn't keep paying for her. Now, she had a better master than her second, but she still thought that her first master would be the best one she had. But she had a feeling this one might be just as good. Ash smiled as Meowsy rubbed her head in his hand as he pets her. He felt sorry for her as she had spent some time telling him and his friends their story. Though this time he didn't do the charade thing with Pikachu and Eevee since he felt that it would be very insulting as he heard how Damien treated her. He didn't need another reason to hate Damien, and now all he could do was make sure that Meowsy was treated right. Don't worry, I'm nothing like Damien. I'll treat you right if you choose to stay with me and my friends. Meowsy looked up at him before shifting her gaze to the other humans and Pokemon. She thought about it for only a second before she stretched out and sat down. I'll stay with you. I don't have anywhere else to go. Ash smiled as he nodded and scratched her behind the ears. Welcome to our little family. Misty looked at Ash and couldn't help but smile as Ash had this amazing talent with Pokemon. He really is something. Brock nodded. True, you can tell that the Meowth is happy to be his Pokemon now. Though after being Pokemon to Damien, anyone would be better. Ash then picked up Meowsy and moved her over to Aveline, who was standing with Pikachu and Eevee by her feet. He put her down and looked at all of them before he spoke. Keep an eye on her, please. She is joining our team, but I gotta check the other Pokemon. Aveline smiled as she nodded. Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on her. Ash smiled before he moved over to the pile of Pokeballs. Eevee walked up to her and smiled. Hi, welcome to our team. I hope we can become friends. Meowsy nodded to Eevee. I hope we get along as well. She turned her head to the other side to look at Pikachu. Immediately sparks went flying as the two stared each other in the eye. Pikachu automatically didn't like this Meowth. Sure, she had to deal with the Team Rocket Meowth, but this one was now part of the team and something about her irked the mouse Pokemon. Meowsy was the same, as she knew that the relationship between her and this Pikachu was not going to be good. Without saying anything, they threw their heads the other way with a hump from both of them. Eevee tilted her head as she was not sure what the issue was. Ash grabbed another one of the Pokeballs and pressed the release button to release the Pokemon. This time, it was a Pokemon that he didn't know. From what Ash could tell, it was a small brown Pokemon that had two small horns on its head and one on its tail, small two-clawed arms, and thick legs for its body. This unknown Pokemon, however, was curled up on itself with its eyes shut and shivering. Ash slowly walked up to it as he could tell that it was afraid. He knelt down next to it as he whispered out, "Hello." He saw that it flinched again and felt the need to calm it down. He slowly brought his hand up. Careful, Ash, we don't know what it might do. Ash looked back to Brock to see his worried expression. I know, but it's scared. He smiled reassuringly at his friends as he looked back at the Pokemon and gently placed the hand on its back. The Pokemon flinched at the touch and shivered more. After a second of not feeling any sort of pain, he slowly opened one of its eyes to peek. When it saw that there was someone there, he shut it again and waited. He then opened his eye again and saw that it wasn't the mean human that he knew from before. Ash gave a soft smile at the Pokemon. Hi there. I'm Ash, who are you? Ash saw that the Pokemon slowly lifted his head before tilting it in confusion. He saw that he opened his mouth and was waiting for a response, only to get Tai, runt. Ash titled his head in confusion at the response and the Pokemon titled his head to mirror Ash's. Misty turned to her two human companions and asked, do either of you know what Pokemon that is? Brock looked at the Pokemon before he shook his head. I've never seen that Pokemon before. He looked to his right at Aveline and asked, have you seen it before? Aveline thought about it as she looked at it, but she also shook her head. No, it must be from a region that I have not yet studied. I can call one of my cousins in order to find any more information about it. Eevee was doing the same as she looked at the other two Pokemon that are there. She chose to ask Meowsy since she was part of Damien's team. Meowsy, do you know? She paused as she saw what the other two Pokemon were doing. Meowsy and Pikachu were now glaring at each other with sparks shooting from their eyes as they looked ready to attack each other. Eevee chose to let them be as she didn't understand what the issue was. Ash brought his hand up to the Pokemon as slowly as possible. The Pokemon looked at the hand before sniffing it. He then looked at the human's eyes as he could feel something about him. He was different from the other human that he had dealt with and he seemed nice. He looked at the hand again before rubbing his nose on the hand, making sure to remember the scent. Ash smiled at the Pokemon's action, but his eyes widened when said Pokemon opened his mouth and swallowed his hand. Aveline grew worried at the action and took a step forward. Ash. But she paused when she saw Ash cover his mouth to stop himself from laughing. Looking closer, she saw that it wasn't really biting on his hand. It was instead play biting. Brock saw this as well and rubbed his chin. I may not know this Pokemon, but I do know that this action is more for baby Pokemon. It might be recently hatched. Misty looked at Brock as she asked, how can you tell? Brock pointed at the action and explained, it is play biting. This is only ever done by baby Pokemon or Pokemon that are in the middle of mating rituals. So, removing the obvious one, this is a baby Pokemon that is most likely doing this as a way to ease in teething, or it just likes to bite things. Aveline nodded. And from the texture of its skin, I think it is a rock or ground type based on skin color. But we should really get a professional opinion before we really establish its type. While the others discussed things, Ash finally got his hand out of the Pokemon's mouth. Tyrant. Ash tilted his head again since he couldn't hear anything other than the Pokemon name. And it sounded very young. He wiped his hand on his pants before he saw the Pokemon walk over to him and laid down at his side while leaning into him. He smiled as he gently ran his hand on the Pokemon's, Tyrant he assumed, head. He then looked at his friend and asked, do you think you can check the other Pokemon? I can't get up right now. The others laughed as they nodded. Misty moved to the pile and grabbed one of the Pokeballs. She tossed it into the air, releasing the Pokemon. It was once again a Pokemon that none of them knew, but it was clear that this was a water Pokemon. The main tell was the fact that it looked like a turtle Pokemon with its main body was blue. Misty went starry-eyed as she saw a water Pokemon that she had never seen before. Wow! What Pokemon is it? The Pokemon looked at the people around him. Who are you? Based on the call the Pokemon did, Misty figured that the Pokemon's name was Turtoga. She turned to Ash with her eyes still shaped like stars as she asked, Ash, can I have this one, please, say? Ash laughed at his friend's pleading look before he looked at the Pokemon. I don't own the Pokemon, Misty. Remember, we have to ask the Pokemon if they want to stay with us, so you should ask if the Pokemon wants to be yours. If not, we release them to go out and do their own thing. He paused as he remembered another option. Or we could tell them about the hidden village. Hearing this, Tirtoga looked confused as he didn't see Damien anywhere around him. And these humans were saying that they would ask him if he wanted to stay or go off on his own. Seeing the confusion, Eevee moved closer and spoke up. Sorry if you are confused, but your previous trainer is no longer around and he lost his right to be a trainer. My trainer Ash was given all of the Pokemon he had and was going through all the Pokemon. Damien had to ask if they wanted to be his Pokemon or if they want to go free. But it looks like Misty, the orange-haired female looking at you, wants to be your trainer. Tirtoga looked at Misty and tried to figure out if she would be a good trainer for him or if he should take the offer to leave. Looking back to Eevee, he asked, "Is a good trainer. Demina only ever sent me out to battle and didn't even bother training me. And from what I heard about trainers, they are supposed to help make you stronger." Damien didn't seem to be trying. Misty is a good trainer. And she loves water Pokemon, so I think she will do everything she can to make you stronger. Tirtoga looked at the girl and thought about if it would even be worth it. Misty walked up to the Tirtoga and knelt down as she looked at the Pokemon. Hi, my name is Misty. Your previous trainer was arrested due to his treatment of one of his Pokemon. As such, we were given all of his Pokemon and we are going through them, asking if they want to be one of our Pokemon or if they want to be free. So I wanna ask if you would like to come traveling with me. Tirtoga stared at her for a bit as he was a little surprised that he was actually being asked. His time with Damien didn't give him a good impression of what a trainer would be like. But looking at these humans told him that they would be much different from the others. It was then that his eyes landed on Tyrant. His eyes widened since this was the first time that he had seen the baby Pokemon sleeping peacefully near a human. Looking up at the human, his instincts told him that there was something very different from the others. Shifting his gaze back to the female, he figured that she might be a better choice, and if Tyrant was okay with the odd human, he could go along with this. He nodded at her and saw her smile grow even wider before she cheered. The others laughed at Misty's excitement. Tyrant was startled awake and he jumped onto Ash's lap before burying his head into his chest. Ash had to hug the Pokemon to calm him down. It's okay. No one is going to hurt you. Aveline on the other hand had another problem. The shout from Misty had set something off with Meowsy and Pikachu as they were now chasing each other around the Pokemon Center. Pikachu was the first one being chased, but she jumped on the table before turning around and pouncing on the cat Pokemon. After getting free from the mouse, the cat Pokemon began to run away from the mouse as this chase continued going back and forth. Eevee sat on the side watching them go as she couldn't figure out what the problem was. Aveline had an idea of what the issue was. There were times when the type of Pokemon just didn't mix. And she wasn't talking about their element type but the breed. Like now, a cat Pokemon and a mouse Pokemon. This isn't always the issue as Pokemon, in general, tend not to care, but there were times when it does show up. They'll get past it eventually. Brock chose to move things along and picked up another Pokeball. He tossed it and out came another water-type Pokemon, but this time it looked more like a brown fish. Seeing that this Pokemon would not be able to stand on land, he moved over and picked up the Pokemon. Though with great effort since the Pokemon was heavy. Ash looked over to Brock and smiled as he knew this one. Hey, that's a Relicanth. That's a Hone Pokemon and a very rare one. A lot of people have trouble finding them since they are deep sea Pokemon. You know, you should ask if it wants to go with you, Brock. It is a rock-water type Pokemon. Ash watched as Brock moved over to the couch to put Relicanth down and ask the question before he looked down at Tyrant as he had calmed down from the earlier shout. Hey, you okay? Tyrant looked up at Ash before he chirped in happiness. Ash smiled and rubbed the Pokemon's head. I'm glad. Ash. Ash looked up to see Aveline hold up a Pokeball to him. We should move on since Misty is gushing over her new Pokemon and Brock is examining Relicanth. Ash looked to the other two to see that they were indeed doing just that. Shrugging, he grabbed the ball before tossing it in the air. It was another Pokemon that Ash knew. It was a bipedal Pokemon with mostly blue fur on it and yellow fur on its torso. It had a steel spike in its chest and black paws. Ash was surprised to see this as he spoke. Wow, the Lucario. The Lucario had its eyes closed as it did not want to look at its trainer. But sensing the human's aura was not appealing either, since the aura of the said trainer was abysmally foul. Focusing on its senses, it was surprising that it didn't sense Damien's aura but many different people. But the one it focused on was the powerful one in front of it. It was powerful but also seemed buried, like it was in a deep sleep. But the amount that it could sense gave off a calming and peaceful being. Though the form this being had seemed to be shifting inconsistently. Like it was stuck in a human form but was warping into another unrecognizable form. It moved closer to this being and sniffed at its face and could recognize the smell of a Pokemon. It tilted its head in confusion as it could not tell what to make of this Pokemon. It continued to sniff, trying to understand this anomaly. Ash leaned back at the sniffing as he was unsure of what was going on. What are you doing? Meowsy was on top of Pikachu, biting on the yellow mouse's ear when she heard the question and looked up to see that Lucario was out of its Pokeball. Oh, Lucario. It is nice to see you again. Ash looked to the cat Pokemon and asked. What is it doing? Meowsy eyed what the bipedal Pokemon was doing before she shrugged. If I had to guess, it is trying to figure you out. You see, I've never seen Lucario speak or open its eyes ever since it joined the team. But from what I know, it did it since Damien was just a horrid person and Lucario didn't want to deal with even seeing him. Though I think it does this to become stronger as well, since it is able to dodge and move like nothing was wrong. Ash was impressed that Lucario was able to do things normally, but he wondered how he would get an answer from this Pokemon if it didn't speak. How am I going to understand it if it doesn't say anything? Meowsy shook her head with a smile. Despite never speaking, it can still communicate with everyone with gestures, and so far it had been enough for all of us. Get off me. Meowsy was kicked off by Pikachu before rolling on the ground. She shook her head before looking up at the mad Pikachu. Pikachu was not happy at being sat on by this cat Pokemon and was about to pounce on her again, but she was lifted by her scruff and held up. That is enough. Pikachu looked up to see Aveline frowning at her. You have been causing enough trouble for the day, so please behave. Ash sweet dropped and gave a dry chuckle at it. He was brought out of this as he felt the sniffing in his ear and flinched away. He looked at Lucario and could see the obvious confusion on its face. He couldn't tell why it was confused about him, and he was starting to feel bad calling it, but he had no way of knowing its gender without any obvious tells or hearing its voice, leaving its gender up to you readers. Closing parenthesis. Figuring he should just get to the point of why he released Lucario. Well, Lucario, I wanted to ask you if you would want to join my team on my journey. You see, Damien, he had to force the name out of his mouth as he really didn't like the guy. Was arrested for his treatment of Pokemon. And my friends and I are going through his Pokemon and asking if they would want to join us or be set free. So, would you like to come with us, or do you want to be free? Lucario stepped back in shock as it could not believe the choices given. It crossed its arms and thought about the choices. Despite how tempting freedom seemed, it was curious about this human. Not only on the amount of suppressed aura but the human in general. And the aura it could feel told it that this human was warm, friendly, and caring. Traits that would make a great companion. Seeing how this human was much different from Damien, it made its choice. Ash waited for any sign of what it wanted. He saw it turn its head towards him and nodded. Ash smiled as he held up a hand to the Pokemon as if to shake its hand. Lucario looked at the hand presented to it before it reached out with a paw and shook it. When the paw made contact, Ash felt something tingle in his arm and move to his chest. What was that? He looked at his hand before shaking his head as he figured it was just something simple. He smiled up at Lucario. I'm glad you decided to join us, Lucario. I promise that I will help you out and I'm sure we will be great friends. Lucario smiled before letting his hand go and stepping back. Ash smiled at Lucario before looking down at Tyrant as he felt that it woke up and was nibbling on his leg. He winced at a hard bite on his leg before he looked over to Aveline, who was now holding both Meowsy and Pikachu away from each other. He looked over to Misty to see her introducing her new Pokemon to the ones she had. Brock was feeding Relicanth and Ash thought he would be the best one to ask. Hey, Brock, do you have anything for this one? I think he is hungry. Brock finished giving Relicanth food he made for water Pokemon and was happy to see that he liked it just about the same as the one he made for rock types. Hearing the question, he looked over to Ash to see that the baby Pokemon was nibbling on Ash's leg. Thinking about what would be needed, he snapped his fingers. Since it is a baby Pokemon, you should crush some berries so he can eat it. Ash nodded as he was about to reach into his bag but winced again at the hard bite on his knee. Easy, Tyrant. I'm going to get you something you can munch on other than my leg. Tyrant shifted his gaze up at him but didn't let go of the leg. Ash chuckled at how Tyrant seemed to enjoy chewing on him but stopped when he felt a tap on his shoulder. Looking up, he saw Lucario holding up some berries on its paws. Thanks, Lucario. Can you go over to Aveline, the younger nurse Joy over there, and get the small bowl and berry crusher she has? Lucario nodded before making its way to said girl. Ash put the berries down, reached to Tyrant's mouth before gently opening it, and removed said Pokemon from his leg. He picked him up, held him in the air, and smiled. Sorry, but my leg isn't something you should eat. His response was the Pokemon softly biting on his wrist. He chuckled at it as he figured this Pokemon would be munching on him a lot. He felt another tap on his shoulder made him look to see Lucario holding the items he needed. Thank you, he watched it nod before he took the items and put it down. He put Tyrant down and put some of the sweet berries into the bowl before crushing them into a paste for the baby Pokemon. His eyes shifted to the side as Lucario sat down, facing him. He couldn't really say it was looking at him since it still had its eyes close. Lucario stared at this human as it continued to look at his shimmering form. It just couldn't understand why there was such oddity with this one. Not only did it have this feeling of a legendary, but the aura he had just made his company welcoming. Lucario continued to stare as this human was like a puzzle that would be interesting to solve. But a smile was brought to its face as it saw this human make food for the newly hatched Pokemon. Ash finished making the paste and put his finger in it before tasting it. He smiled as he was tempted to eat some of it himself, but he knew that it was for the baby Pokemon. He looked around for him to put the paste on but found that there wasn't anything he could use. It was his fortune that Brock walked over, looking at the Pokeball that he figured held Relicanth. Hey, Brock, got anything I can use to put this on? Brock put the ball on his belt before he reached into his bag and pulled out a plate. Here, this should be perfect for that. He saw Ash put the paste on the plate and put it in front of Tyrant, who sniffed it before eating it eagerly. Gotta say, I'm impressed that you know how to handle a baby Pokemon. Not many trainers know about this. Ash smiled as he watched Tyrant eat. I tried to learn as much as I could about Pokemon and I learned some feeding methods for them. I know baby Pokemon usually feed on their parent, but I also know that berry paste can be a good substitute in case the parent isn't around or you don't have any milk safe for them. I learned how to do this just in case. Brock smiled at this insight. I think you are the perfect candidate for a junior professor. What can I say, I love Pokemon. Brock nodded as he looked at the pile of Pokeballs. Are you going to check the others? Ash nodded as he got up. He looked to Lucario and asked, can you watch Tyrant for me? Lucario nodded as it watched Ash walk to the pile. Ash looked at the pile and noticed something. There were 4 balls that had stickers on them. 2 of them had a fire sticker on them while the other 2 had a full black sticker with a red dot on one and 2 dots on the other. Ash wondered what they were and picked up the fire ones. I wonder why Damien put a sticker on these 4. Misty walked up behind him as she rubbed her cheek on her new Pokemon. When she stood next to him she spoke. Maybe they are a pair or something. Ash scratched his head before he shrugged. Turning around, he tossed the two balls into the air and released the Pokemon. Out of the two came two canine Pokemon. One was a Kanto region Pokemon while the other was a Johto Pokemon. The one from Kanto was a Growlithe. The second was a Houndour. When the two Pokemon opened their eyes, the Growlithe immediately shrunk in on itself while the Houndour moved to stand protectively over it, growling at everyone there. Houndour. Who are they? Don't worry about it. I won't let them hurt you. Ash immediately registered that the Growlithe was female while the Houndour was male. His nose twitched as there was a scent wafting from them. He wasn't sure what the scent was since he never smelt it before, but something in his mind told him that these two Pokemon were together. On the other side of the room, Meowsy shrieked at the sight of the two dog Pokemon and ran to hide under the dinner table close by. Pikachu smirked at the action as they had been at each other's throats since Meowsy was let out, but now she counted this as a victory. Looking over to her trainer, she ran over to him before she stopped by his feet. Ash looked down at Pikachu before looking at the two canine Pokemon. He knelt to them and brought his hands up when the Houndour growled at him. Easy, I'm sorry for startling you. My name is Ash. Your old trainer isn't around anymore and I was given all of his Pokemon. We are going through all of you and asking if you would want to either join me on my journey or we can release you to go off on your own. Houndour continued to growl at him as his eyes shifted from the human to those around him. Houndour, don't worry, I won't let this human hurt you. Houndour bared his fangs at the closest human as he waited for anything that would cause them harm. Ash could see that nothing he said would get the Houndour to calm down. Pikachu stepped forward to try and calm down the dark type. Hey, calm down. He isn't going to hurt you. She had to jump back as Houndour's mouth lit in fire and bit at her. Hey. Houndour was about to switch to Flamethrower but was tackled from the side by Eevee. The two rolled on the ground before they got to their paws and faced each other, baring their teeth at each other. Growlithe pushed herself back from everyone as her eyes tracked Houndour. Everyone looked over at the two as they faced each other. Ash couldn't let this happen and jumped in between the two. Wait, stop. I don't want any fighting going on. Eevee shifted her gaze to Ash before it returned to Houndour. Ash, he nearly attacked Pikachu. She didn't like raising her voice at Ash, but Houndour has proven itself as a threat and she would not allow anything to hurt her friends. Ash shook his head. No. You saw how Damien was. Do you think you would trust humans if you had him as a trainer from the start? Eevee flinched at that as the very thought of having that jerk as a trainer almost made her sick. She looked behind her to see Pikachu had the same look on her face while Meowsy had a look of understanding. Lucario just seemed to tense at that. The other humans made a face of anger at the constant reminder of him. Ash placed his hand on Eevee's head and gently scratched behind her ear. Let me handle this, okay? Eevee nodded as she enjoyed the scratches. Ash then turned to Houndour to see him still growling at him. Looking behind the dark type, he saw Growlithe still pushing against the wall. Seeing how this was going, he brought out their Pokeballs and held them in his hand. I can see that you won't want to join us, so just say the word and I'll let you both free. Houndour glared at the balls. I want nothing to do with you humans. Just let us go. He was about to unleash another flamethrower but paused as he witnessed what the human did next. Ash nodded and held down the button on both balls till they both opened up and released a blue light that hit both Growlithe and Houndour. Growlithe flinched at the light but didn't feel the usual pull of the ball. Houndour took a few steps back from the human as he wasn't sure what had just happened. But one thing he noticed was that he no longer felt the attachment to the ball. Ash shrunk the balls and put them in his pocket. There you go. You longer have to worry about being returned to the ball. Both you and Growlithe are free to go. Ash could see the hesitation in the Pokemon's eyes as it backed away from him. Houndour backed up from the odd human as he kept his eyes on everyone in the room. Once he was close to Growlithe, he whispered into her ear and nudged her towards the door. Once Growlithe started moving, he walked with her with his gaze still on them all. Once they got to the door, Growlithe flinched as she saw that it was raining. Houndour, it's raining. Houndour looked to see that it was, but they were close to gaining freedom. Push through it. We are close to getting out of here. But, quote exclamation mark, hey, the two canine Pokemon were suddenly lifted up and moved away from the door by Lucario. Lucario had put Tyrant down and the small dinosaur Pokemon moved to hide behind Ash. Houndour looked up and was about to attack but stopped when he saw who it was. Lucario. Said Pokemon looked down and nodded before it placed the two canines down away from everyone. Growlithe looked up in astonishment. Lucario. What is going on? Lucario turned and pointed to Ash before turning to the two and nodding. Houndour took a step. Are you saying that what that human said was true? He is just willing to let us go on our own. Lucario tapped on its hip before making a circle shape with its paws, signifying the ball they used to be in. Houndour looked confused before looking toward the human that had released them. Lucario nodded before walking back to Ash's side, sitting down next to him, picking Tyrant up again, and gently pat its head to calm it down. Ash smiled gratefully at Lucario. Thanks for stopping them. Fire Pokemon don't really like the rain and I don't want a repeat of what happened to Charmander. Lucario tilted its head at the mention of the newer member of Damien's or rather Ash's team. Ash saw the confusion before he went about explaining what happened to Charmander. At the end of the explanation, he placed his hand on the ball that held the fire Pokemon. Lucario nodded in gratitude as Charmander was the newest member and the most naive of them. And it was glad that Ash was now the young Pokemon's trainer. Ash smiled at Lucario before moving to the pile again. Growlithe and Houndour watched as the human walked away from them with Houndour narrowing his eyes. He gently nudged Growlithe to move away from the others. They moved to be by a couch that was against the wall and hid on its side. Growlithe looked at Houndour and asked, "Are we still trapped?" Houndour growled as his teeth lit on fire. I won't allow it anymore. He kept his eyes on the humans as he would attack any sign of them doing something that would threaten them. Pikachu moved to sit next to Lucario with Eevee joining them. She looked over to the two canine Pokemon as she wanted to make sure they didn't do anything. After that reaction, she was worried that Ash might get another Pokemon that might attack him. That brought something else to her mind. How durable is Ash? He is a Pokemon, so he has to be more durable than a human, but he hasn't trained at all in his life, so he might not be that strong. She shook her head as this wasn't something that they were going to figure out anytime soon. Misty and Brock moved to stand by Aveline as she began to pet Meowsy. Misty looked to Aveline as she asked, "How can someone be this amazing with Pokemon?" He stopped Eevee from fighting when Pikachu was attacked and released those two. It's almost like he would do anything for Pokemon. Aveline nodded. Because he would. He would do everything in his power to help Pokemon, even if they don't belong to him. One time he even ran around the forest to find the parent of a baby Pidgey that had gotten lost. I spent the whole day running after him through the forest. Brock chuckled. I think he was a good choice to join him since he is a very interesting trainer. The sound of a Pokeball opening brought their attention back to Ash as he released a new Pokemon. The sound of buzzing was heard and Misty screeched in fear at the sight of a Beedrill and a Scyther. She jumped behind Brock and Aveline to get away from them. Why did he have to release bug types? Brock dryly chuckled as he couldn't answer that. The group watched as Ash spoke to the two and could tell that Pikachu and Eevee were in a ready stance as if they were ready for an attack. Seeing this, Brock turned to Aveline. How long has he been around Pokemon? I mean, your Gardevoir and Miltank seem to be his caretaker, with the psychic type being with him since he was younger. Aveline thought back to what she was told and spoke. He has been around Pokemon since the day he was born. In fact, it was a Pokemon that saved his life. She noticed the look coming from Brock and Misty and continued, making sure that she kept details to herself. A Pokemon was able to save his life when he was born, and I don't know if it was a subconscious reaction to it, but Ash has been around Pokemon even before he was able to crawl. And Pokemon have gained this instinct to help him. He has his mother and he loves her, but he also has a bunch of Pokemon caretakers that dote on him. You've seen how Miltank and Gardevoir act around him. Gardevoir is close to doing things for him and Miltank dotes on him every time she comes out. You should have seen his other caretakers. One is even worse. Brock chuckled at that. I would like to see that. I'm sure that Ash would like to see them again even if he grumbles about it. He has his childish moments. Misty peeked over his shoulder as she nodded. Yeah, but he is a good guy. That he is. The three humans saw that Ash pressed the release button of the two Pokemon's Pokeballs. They saw him gesture to the door and the two Pokemon nodding before they moved over to the side of the center and sit down. Ash took a breath as he moved over to the pile again. He had released Beedrill and Scyther as they wanted to head back to their home, but he asked them to wait till the rain ended so they wouldn't have any trouble. He was thankful that Lucario had helped out since they weren't that trusting about his word. He was also glad that Pikachu and Eevee didn't attack since he could see that they were close to attacking at any sign of hostility. He grabbed another ball and opened it, only to see that it was empty. Ha! It's empty. He shrugged before he put it down and picked up another one. He got the same result with another Pokeball. He looked at the smaller number of balls and figured that some of them were empty just to show off he has a bunch of them. Why say that they were all Pokemon when some of them are empty? He couldn't figure out why Damien would lie about it, but in the end, it didn't matter. The third one was also empty till he saw the two Pokeballs that had the black sticker on them. He picked one of them up and opened it. Out of the Pokeball came a small dark gray fox Pokemon with a red-tipped tail. Wow! Azorua. At the sound of a human's voice, said Pokemon flinched and ran away from Ash before hiding behind a plant. Ash saw this and slowly walked over. Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. Once he got closer, Zorua jolted away from the plant and jumped over the front desk, and hid under the chair. He walked over to it but stopped when Lucario grabbed his wrist. Looking back, he saw it shake its head. Are you sure? Lucario nodded. Ash nodded in return as he sighed. Okay, I'll let it go. I can tell it is afraid of me, so I should release it immediately. He looked at the ball in his hand and went with the releasing process. Once that was done, he went to the last few Pokeballs and picked up the second one. The Zorua had felt the release from the ball and peeked around the desk at the human. There was something about this human that felt off. Not just the feeling, but it was also like the human was hiding something. Seeing the Eevee look over at him, he flinched back. Lucario sat back down and kept its gaze on Ash. Something in the back of its mind rang through it and saw Ash pick up the ball. The ball with the second black sticker. It was then that Lucario's head whipped over to the desk and realized something. The sound of a ball opening was heard. Ash waited for the Pokemon to fully come out of the ball and noticed that once the color became clear, it was a tall bipedal Pokemon that had the same coloration as Zorua but with more red. He immediately knew that it was a Zoroark. But something was wrong. Zoroark had its eyes closed before they snapped open and glared at the human in front of it. In a quick motion, its claws lit up in dark energy and swiped at the human. Ash flinched back as he felt the attack strike him. Aah! He was sent flying and slammed into the wall. Everyone in the center sprang into action at that, with the humans running towards Ash while the Pokemon got into a ready position. The sudden attack caused Growlithe and Houndour to flinch, and Houndour began to push Houndour away and towards the opening that led to behind the front desk. Go, go. But, just go. Both canine Pokemon ran, but Houndour paused as it looked back to the fight about to happen before following Growlithe. Zoroark lunged at the fallen human with another attack prepped to strike. But once it swung its claw at him, Lucario appeared in front of it and slammed its paw to Zoroark's wrist, sending it to the side. The dark type jumped back to avoid the kick aimed at it. Lucario moved forward and used Force Palm on it. The dark type pivoted to the side to avoid the first strike, but another palm was sent into its side. The Zoroark slammed into the wall but didn't fall yet. It was then that it saw Nurse Joy coming from behind the desk and in rage, slashed at her. But before the attack could make contact, the slash was met with a blade-like appendage. Scyther could not allow this attack to continue and jumped in front of the nurse and blocked the slash. He held back the claws as he tried to protect one of the humans he felt didn't deserve this. Stop, Zoroark. They aren't related to Damien. They mean no harm. He didn't have the chance to say anything else as he brought his other blade arm to block the second slash. He had to begin using cut as Zoroark started Night Slash again. Zoroark slashed at Scyther as the bug Pokemon parried her attacks. It then had to jump back as Beedrill came in with Poison Sting. It dodged left and right as the fight moved to the middle of the lobby, causing chaos for everyone in there. It then used Mean Look on Beedrill, causing the bee Pokemon to freeze for a second before bringing a Night Slash on the Pokemon and sending it flying onto the lobby table. It turned back to Ash and was about to attack till it was hit in the side with an Aura Sphere from Lucario. Lucario moved to stand in front of Ash and his friends before charging at the dark Pokemon. Zoroark dug its claws into the ground to stop it sliding before bringing its Shadow Claw up to meet the Force Palm. Lucario jump flipped backward before sending another Aura Sphere at Zoroark. Zoroark used Shadow Claw to slash the sphere and winced since it still hurt to do so. It slashed a few more as Lucario kept sending spheres at it. But after slashing 5 more of them in a row, the 6th one impacted hard in its stomach. It flew back and slammed into the wall before falling into a crouch. Mima. Zoroark was brought out of its rage and looked over to the desk to see Zorua before running towards the now known male Pokemon. Are you okay? The voice told everyone there that the Zoroark was female. Once she saw that he was okay, she picked him up and ran towards the door. Everyone jumped out of the way as they did not want to get attacked by her again. Fortunately, the door was open from all the movement and the 2 dark types ran out into the rain and into the woods. Every one of Ash's friends were crouching by him as he was on the ground with his head leaning on the wall. Ash. Ash, you okay? Ash. Ash. Quiet. Everyone stopped when Aveline shouted at them all to stop shouting. She understood that they were all worried, but at the moment, the panic was not helping. Aveline calmed down and looked at Ash. She lifted his shirt and saw 3 long marks across his chest. Arceus, this is bad. Ash winced as he tried to sit up straighter. I'm okay. He lowered himself as he was losing energy. Aveline scowled at him. No, you are not. Getting into her role, she pulled out her Pokeballs and released Miltank, Gardevoir, and Chansey. The second they all came out and saw Ash's prone form, they got into their role while keeping their panic internal. Aveline was about to order Gardevoir to pick Ash up and take him to their room for treatment, but she was beaten to the punch as Lucario picked up the boy. Seeing that Ash was in the Pokemon's arms, she pointed to their room. Carry him to our room. She then looked at Brock and Misty. I'm going to take care of Ash. Can you two look after the remaining Pokeballs and release them? Be careful. We don't need another incident. Brock and Misty nodded reluctantly. They wanted to follow Ash and make sure he was alright, but with Aveline's right as his medical caretaker, they could do nothing but obey. Ash lifted an arm to get everyone's attention. I'm fine, really. All I need is a nap. Aveline placed a hand on his forehead and frowned. Ash, be good and let us do what we are going to do. Ash dropped his head and sighed in defeat. Okay. With that, Lucario, the medical group, Meowsy, Pikachu, and Eevee, made their way to their room. Tyrant was confused about what was going on, but after all the chaos that happened, didn't want to be left alone, so it ran after the group and entered the room just before the door closed. Misty and Brock watched as they left as they were worried about Ash. Misty looked at Brock and asked, "How bad do you think it is?" Brock thought about it and knew about other trainers being attacked by Pokemon. Normally Pokemon attacks don't have this kind of effect on people. I've seen people take flamethrowers and brush it off, but Ash looked like he was really hurt by that move. Misty wondered why Ash was affected so much. She also knew about people taking Pokemon attacks, but Ash looked really hurt. But with the medical team with him, she figured he would be fine. At least, she hoped he would be. Lucario laid the boy on the bed before taking a step back as Aveline moved over to him. Ash began to sweat as the pain from the attack was starting to get to him. Why does this hurt so much? I've been hit with a swift before, but it never hurt like this. Don't concern yourself with that right now. Aveline undressed him as she usually did before looking at Chansey. Sing, focused on Ash. Chansey didn't hesitate and did as asked, getting the boy to fall asleep. Lucario watched as the form of the boy changed and understood why when it sensed the boy's aura before, it seemed off. Though it didn't recognize the form, it chose to not think too heavily about it. It had already chosen to stay with the boy, and that is what it was going to do. Meowsy on the other hand was gaping at the sight of her new trainer. She looked over the Pokemon now on the bed in interest, as she had never seen a Pokemon like him before. Tyrant didn't see anything wrong with what happened, so it jumped on the bed and nudged Ash in worry, cause it did know that he was hurt and didn't like the idea of Ash being hurt. Aveline smiled at the young Pokemon before looking at the mark that showed where Ash was hit inside. I know you are going to hate me for doing this, but the second I have a chance to make a call, I'm bringing her in. This cannot be a common thing with you, Ash. Healing you this way is detrimental to your health and don't even know what level you are at. She pulled out some medical paste before spreading it on the wound, but with no experience, you have to be at a low level. Not that I can ask a professor to check, since we are trying to keep you a secret. After she put on the paste, she looked at Gardevoir and ordered, "Heal pulse, please." Gardevoir nodded before moving closer and taking Aveline's spot before using the move. After a couple of pulses to Ash, another set of pulses came from her side. She looked to see that Lucario was doing the same. She was a bit shocked that the newcomer was doing this with no explanation or prompting, but she nodded. "Thank you." The Lucario only nodded in response. Yvonne and her Pokemon were just as surprised as Gardevoir was, but she would not turn away any help. She waited for a few more heal pulses before she told them to stop. She retook her spot next to the bed and could tell that he was now resting more calmly. She sighed as she pressed her palm on his head. He is still worn out from the attack, but he should feel better after resting. She stood up and looked at the conscious Pokemon. Make sure he sleeps. If he wakes up before the morning, put him to sleep again and make sure that no one else comes in. Seeing the Pokemon already in the know nod, she looked to the two that didn't know. Can I ask you to do as I asked as well? Meowsy was still staring at Ash, but was brought out of her shock when Pikachu shoved her. She glared at Pikachu before the question registered in her head and looked to the young nurse and nodded. Lucario didn't show any sign of acknowledgement. It just moved to the door before opening it and walking out. Aveline and the rest were confused as to why it did that, but had more important matters. She looked back to the others and nodded. Thank you. She walked out of the room, putting her trust into the Pokemon. Once she was outside, she saw that Lucario was sitting against the adjacent wall, facing the door. It was then she realized that the blue Pokemon was going to do as she asked and guard Ash, but from the outside. Thank you. This time, Lucario did nod in acknowledgement. Aveline moved back to the others to see that they were helping clean up the mess that just happened, and her cousin was looking over Scyther and Beedrill. Brock saw Aveline walking toward them and asked, "How's Ash?" Aveline sighed as she took off her nurse hat and moved over to the desk and grabbed a broom that was left there. He will be fine after some rest. But I'm bringing in another of his caretakers when the storm ends. Misty put down the chair she had and looked to the young nurse. I've actually had a question for some time. How many caretakers does he have? He has you and all, but Dratini seems to be brought to take care of him. I understand the reason for it, so I'm just curious as to how many. Aveline paused and thought about all the Pokemon that had taken the role of caring for the young legendary clone. She didn't know if she should answer with the general medical care team, the defending team, the nannies, the friends Ash made that became his protectors, or all of them in general. Delia and her mother went to great lengths to protect him. And the fact that he had this habit of finding trouble didn't help their nerves. She figured the best way to answer is to be vague. His mother was a very worrying and doting mother, and since she was good friends with my mother, it got to the point that he has a good amount of members taking care of him. Brock and Misty looked at each other as they could only imagine how many that would actually mean. Aveline decided to bring the conversation to the other Pokeballs that were left. Did you open the rest of Damien's Pokeballs? Brock nodded. Yeah, and it turns out that the rest of them were empty. If I had to guess, he just added the empty ones to make it look like he had more Pokemon than he did. Aveline shook her head at the audacity of the former trainer. Trainers like him are why there are so many Pokemon suffering out there. Her gaze moved to the outside before sighing. Well, with how Ash will need rest and the storm still going, we should all get some sleep since it is late in the day. Brock and Misty looked at the clock that was on the wall and saw that it was around 9 at night. Figuring that it was a good idea, they decided that they needed to finish cleaning up before taking up the suggestion. Aveline then noticed that there was a lack of fire Pokemon. Where are Growlite and Houndour? Misty looked to the back of the center behind the desk. They ran towards the back to avoid any more contact with us. I think they went there when the fight started. Aveline's heart sank as she hated how fearful they were of the humans and ran away as soon as they could to get away from them. Damn it, Damien. Next morning, Aveline was the first one to wake up and almost panicked when she didn't see Ash in the same room with her. She had to calm herself as she remembered that Ash was in the next room with all of her Pokemon right now. She was at the moment in the same room as Brock and Misty and slowly got out of bed and silently walked out into the hallway to see Lucario still sitting in front of the door. She couldn't tell if it was sleeping or not. She silently continued to move to the lobby of the Pokemon Center. She saw her cousin already setting up the front desk to start her day. Good morning. Nurse Joy looked up from the computer and smiled at her cousin. Morning, Avoine. Sleep well. Aveline nodded. Yes, thank you for the rooms. She then looked to the video phones and asked, are the phones and Pokeball transport working now? Nurse Joy looked at the phones before she answered. I'm not sure. With the storm now done, it is most likely that they should be working. Aveline nodded and moved to the phones. She sat on the phone and dialed her home's number. She waited for a minute till her mother came to the screen already dressed for her job. Aveline, it's good to hear from you. How is your journey with Ash going? Aveline smiled at the sight of her mother. It's going fine for the most part, but Ash's luck is getting the best of us. Nurse Joy smiled nostalgically at the memories of him getting into trouble with other Pokemon and would get hurt from a stray attack. It was then that her smile shrunk as she figured what the call would be about. I guess that means that you are calling for one of them, aren't you? Aveline nodded. Yes. I wish we could talk more about the journey, but I think it best to bring her in as soon as possible. We do plan on moving on as soon as possible. Nurse Joy nodded as she asked. Which one? Aveline smiled as she told her mother which Pokemon to send over. After some small discussion, Aveline looked to the side where the Pokeball transport lit up and found a Pokeball waiting for her. Did she arrive? Aveline nodded. Yeah, she is here. I know she will be so happy to see Ash again and he will be annoyed about it. Both had a small laugh about it before Nurse Joy looked elsewhere and spoke to someone off screen. I'll be right with you. She looked back to the screen and smiled. I am happy to hear from you and to see that Ash is still doing okay and will be doing better with her now on your team. Please call more often so we can talk. Aveline smiled and nodded. Of course. I'll call more often. Nurse Joy then smiled wider, and don't forget to tell Ash to call his mother. She has been worried about him and called me a few times to see if you called me. Aveline nodded. I will. I'm sure he wants to hear from her as well. Take care of yourselves. I will. Bye, Aveline. Bye, Mom. She hung up the phone and looked at the ball in her hand. She clipped it to her belt before noticing the Scyther and Beedrill were already gone. She turned to her cousin and asked, did the Beedrill and Scyther leave already? Nurse Joy looked up and nodded. They left the moment that the rain stopped. Growlithe and Houndour ran out after them. I don't think the two fire types could handle being around people anymore. Aveline gave a defeated sigh. Pokemon shouldn't have to be afraid of people like that. Nurse Joy smiled sadly at her before she finished on the computer and moved to the lights and turned on the main lights of the center. Sadly, there are people out there that should never have Pokemon and would see them as nothing more than tools. It's a sad fact of the world. Aveline nodded. And that's why Ash is treated as if he is a fragile royal with bodyguards all around him. Her mood improved a bit as she jokingly thought to herself. Although he is kind of royalty to Pokemon, it was then she saw Lucario jump up onto its feet and stare at the door it was guarding. She focused on the door and saw the small flash of light from the bottom of the door and immediately knew that Ash must have woken up and that she needed to see him. She got closer to the door and saw Lucario look at her. She whispered out thank you for guarding him. Seeing the Pokemon nod, she opened the door to see Ash floating in the air thanks to Gardevoir. She couldn't help but find it amusing to see Ash floating in the air and Tyrant was jumping in the air as if he was a toy for it to play with. Good morning, Ash, enjoying your morning. Ash grumbled at her as he was still floating in the air. He looked to Gardevoir and asked, can't you at least let me put on something to wear? The psychic fairy type gave a coy smile before shaking her head. No. She didn't need to look at the others as they walked up to her side with objects in their arms. Ash's eyes widened when he saw that they had sponges, towels, shampoo, and soap. He immediately put his arms in an X formation and shook his head rapidly with a massive blush on his face. No, I don't need you to do that for me. Seeing that they were not going to accept his rejection, he began to swim in the air in a futile attempt to get away from them. Gardevoir merely smiled sweetly as she made her way into the room's personal bathroom, which had a tub, shower inside. Sorry, Ash, but you were hurt badly yesterday, so we are going to do this. And please stop flailing, you'll hurt yourself again. Ash knew that she wasn't sorry in the slightest and could already tell that the wound on his chest was already healed, so he didn't need the sponge bath treatment. I said I don't need it. He didn't get away from it as they moved into the bathroom and closed the door. Aveline looked to the rest of the Pokemon who stared oddly at the door they went into. Let's go get some breakfast. Seeing the Pokemon shake their heads to get out of their shock, she moved over to Tyrant who was scratching the door to get into the bathroom. Don't worry, he'll be out soon. She soothed the baby Pokemon and moved out of the room, and gestured for Lucario to follow her. Ash was sitting on a chair looking at the video phone as his face was red from embarrassment at how he was bathed by the Pokemon when he was fully capable of doing it himself. It was only ever done when he was hurt very badly and still not healed, but it had been a long time since it had happened. They didn't need to wash me. He was in another set of clothing that they even put on him, which was another thing he wasn't happy about. Now he had to call his mother to tell her he was still okay, and with how long it had been since his last call, he was sure she would overreact to it. He sighed as he picked up the phone and dialed his house number. After a few rings, he heard her voice and felt some weight he didn't know he had off his shoulders. Hello, Ketchum residence. Hey, Mima. Ah. After a second, her face appeared on the screen with a wide smile. Ash. After she saw his face and that he was still the same as he was before, she frowned. Where have you been, young man? You haven't called in such a long time and I was beginning to worry about you. Ash winced at her slight shouting but smiled sheepishly at her. Sorry, but we've been on the road all this time and I haven't seen any road phones we could use. Where are you right now? We're in a Pokemon Center in the middle of our route. We plan on moving on to the next town after we eat something for breakfast. Delia nodded as she heard this. And how have you been holding up out there? She saw him open his mouth and cut him off before he could say anything, and don't lie to me. Ash slumped as he wanted to just tell her that he was fine. He can only dream that he would get away with stuff. So he told her what happened and he had to sit there for another 20 minutes as she continued to rant at him for being reckless and not taking care of himself. Ash sunk more and more as she continued to get on his case and was close to panicking when he thought that she would demand he return home. Delia was close to telling Ash that he should return home, but she didn't want to keep her son prisoner. After she was sure that he understood the problem, she took a deep breath and swallowed back the demand. Ash, just be sure that you are not doing anything too dangerous. Ash nodded meekly to reassure her. I will, Mima. Delia nodded before stating, and don't keep me waiting for the next call. Ash nodded again. I won't. Delia smiled. Okay, I won't need a report from Aveline since she already told her mother about you and she told me. Ash couldn't help but groan as he thought to himself. Why won't they just let me go off on my own without babying me? Delia could tell from the look on his face and chuckled at his face. Anyway, take care of yourself and don't forget to change your underwear. Ash face Fulton lay on the ground for a few seconds before sitting back on the seat. I will, Mima. Delia would have reprimanded him for calling her that, but she was so worried about not hearing from him that she allowed it. Take care, Ash. Ash nodded. Bye, Mom. He hung up and sighed as he couldn't help but think. This morning is so embarrassing. After he sat there for a minute, he remembered something else he had to do and called up the professor. He couldn't drop the massive grin that he gained when he thought about getting back the Pokemon that he had to send to the researcher. Professor Oak's face popped up on the screen and he smiled at the sight of the boy. Ah, Ash, good to hear from you, boy. I assume this is about you becoming a junior professor. Ash nodded as he pressed his hand on the screen in excitement. Yeah, it is. I actually want you to send back the Pokemon I sent you. Oak couldn't help but chuckle at the boy's enthusiasm. He figured it would be something like this. I don't mind sending you back the Pokemon, but I should warn you, Ash, that despite how you have become a junior professor, my congratulations, by the way, you won't be able to hold as many Pokemon as you want. You are limited to 12 at max. This means you have 2 teams in terms of numbers and any more will be sent to my lab. But for this privilege, you must send back some Pokemon to my lab on occasion so that you have a rotation to study on. You can register 6 Pokemon to remain with you as your general use team so you can keep them instead of sending them, but the rest must be on rotation. And when you have anything to report on the research of your Pokemon, send them to me so I can look them over. Do you understand? Ash nodded to show he understood his new responsibility on the matter. He didn't like that he had to send some of his new friends to the lab, but he had to remember what Misty said, that he will see them again. Understood, Professor. Oak smiled. Good. Ash, give me a minute so I can get your Pokemon. After a minute of waiting, Ash saw the professor return with a ball and placed it in the transport. He waited for a second before the ball appeared on his end and he grabbed it with a smile. Thanks, Professor, and I promise that I won't let you down. I know you won't. And I look forward to seeing what you have to learn from studying your Pokemon. I will, Professor. With that the call ended and Ash looked at the ball before he tossed it in the air, releasing the Pokemon. Out of the ball came Pidgeotto, who looked around in confusion. What the? He was suddenly hugged by his trainer and he was even more confused. Ash. So happy to have you back. Pidgeotto sweet dropped at this as he thought to himself. But it hasn't even been 2 days. After some more hugs that ruffle the bird Pokemon's feathers, Ash returned him to his ball before placing it on his belt. Ash, you ready to go? Ash looked to the entrance to see Misty calling him over. Coming. He waved Nurse Joy goodbye before he joined his friends outside. Ready to go, he smiled at his friend before it became a look of confusion when all of them looked at him with a teasing smile. Even Eevee and Pikachu. Meowsy, who was the only one of his new Pokemon that didn't return to her ball, was the only one that wasn't smirking. What's going on, guys? Aveline walked forward with a smile that was almost menacing. Ash, you were injured badly from yesterday's attack and I believe that you should have someone making sure that you won't be hurt again. Ash took a step back as he didn't like where this was going. He gulped as he looked her in the eyes. I told you that I was fine. I don't need any more babysitters. This caused Brock and Misty to stifle their laughter. Aveline didn't drop her smile as she reached down and unclipped the ball she called from her mother. No, I think that you do. Ash looked at the ball with dread. Who is in that? Aveline didn't vocally answer but just turned around and opened the ball in an open area. Everyone watched as the light from the ball began to take shape of the Pokemon, but what caught most of their attention was that the form kept growing. Soon they had to look up at where they thought the head of the Pokemon was and soon saw the color of the Pokemon. It was a large Pokemon, with most of its skin being brown, a tail, and two horns on its head. Ash tried to shrink in his jacket as he muttered out, Kangaskhan. Everyone was surprised about the Pokemon, not because they didn't know that Aveline had received this Pokemon, but the sheer size of it. It was at least 3 times bigger than a normal one. Kangaskhan opened her eyes and looked at the group staring at her, but it was when her eyes landed on Ash that a smile spread on her face. Ash. She moved towards the boy and then picked him up from under his arms. How have you been? You look a little thinner than the last time I saw you. Are you eating right? Are you taking care of yourself? She paused as she saw that he had some scuff marks on his cheek and she narrowed her eyes at him. Ash, what have you been doing out here? It's no wonder Aveline called for me here if you are unable to take care of yourself. Ash raised a hand as he tried to defend himself. But AHP, no excuses. She then cradled Ash in one of her arms and used her other one to lift off his hat and put it on his chest before she began to run her claw through his hair as she inspected him in case there was something else she couldn't see. Ash couldn't help but blush as he hated how she treated him like a literal baby. The rest of the group couldn't help but laugh at Ash's predicament. Aveline smiled as she walked forward and looked up at the super-sized Kangaskhan. I'm sure you can tell that he was hurt yesterday and he is still recovering, even if it is just a little more. But with how he is, I want to avoid him getting into more trouble, so do you mind? She gestured to the Pokemon and smiled as she saw the Pokemon nod. Kangaskhan then grabbed Ash with both her claws before she lowered him into her pouch. Ash glared at Aveline as he whined. Aveline, why are you letting her do this? The young nurse just smirked at him. You're still hurt and this way, you won't run around and get hurt even worse. Yeah, but, nope, and this won't be forever. This is just till you are better and only I will say when you are better. Seeing Ash slump in the pouch, she looked to the others. Ready to go. The others nodded as they began to walk down the road, with Brock looking up at the Pokemon in interest. Pikachu, Eevee, and now Meowsy, climbed up Kangaskhan's leg and joined Ash in the pouch. Pikachu and Meowsy glared at each other before huffing and shifting away from each other. Kangaskhan smiled down at how her surrogate Mon's friends joined him in her pouch. She began to walk, following Aveline and Ash's human friends. Ash, meanwhile, just crossed his arms and pouted. Why do they treat me like this?
Hey guys, if you like this video, please do one thing, like it, share it with your those friends who love to watch Pokemon or any fanfic of anime which are related to specific genres. So please do that and turn on the bell icon for notification of these any other series which are still ongoing on channel. Thanks for watching.